All right, and we are live. Welcome back with Murphy Mac to another episode of the Fitness Beginner Podcast, where we help you get started on your fitness journey. How's it going, everybody? We have another podcast episode for y'all today. We have an interview. We have a guest joining us today, and we have Dr. Diane Mueller joining us on the podcast today. So she is a double doctorate, a board certified sexologist. I don't know what that means, but we're gonna find out today. She's a best-selling author, national speaker, and she's also has her own podcast, the Libido Lounge podcast. So, and her mission is to demystify sexual wellness for long-term couples, especially those starting or restarting their fitness journeys. So, a little bit about our podcast is we're all about helping people get started on their fitness journey. We try to keep things normally typically pretty basic level, and then when we have people on like you, we'll dive deeper into some more specific topics. So I'm excited about our conversation today because I'll be honest, I don't know much about what you do, so I'm excited to learn, and I think the listeners will get something out of it too. So
Yeah,
if you
I'm
would,
happy to be here.
I
Go ahead. Sorry.
was going to say, if you would just go ahead and kind of introduce yourself and just give everybody kind of a glimpse of who you are and what you do.
Sure. So, like you said, I'm Dr. Diane Mueller. I am known as the libido doc because I really combine medicine, research with all the sexy stuff. So, my goal is really to help long term monogamous couples have better passion and desire. Some of the more recent inspiration for this was from a fairly recent Harvard study, which showed that if we look at all the different things that we do to help us not just live longer, but to live better, happier lives, of anything we do, the number one thing that led to longer, better, happier lives was actually the quality of our relationships. So that's a lot of what I really do is help couples that are struggling with low libido, with desire mismatch, with feeling like this part of their life is a little out of balance, a little off kilter, sometimes a lot out of balance, a lot off kilter, to find the reasons behind a low sex drive, the reasons behind low desire, and to really help them get back on track with their passion and their relationship. And to kind of just let the listeners know from like a fitness standpoint, some of the relationship here to even your fitness goals. One of the things that comes up a lot in the fitness community, I know, is the conversation around cortisol and how do I manage my cortisol and how do I help that belly fat and how do I get this, taken care of. What we actually see is that the hormone oxytocin that gets released when we orgasm, the better the oxytocin, is actually directly related to being able to bring down and normalize those high cortisol levels. So it's one of oxytocin, our love hormone, is actually one of the best ways to improve hormones throughout our body, with cortisol being the top one of them. So that's one of the ways it can even fit into the world of fitness.
Awesome. So how did you get into this field, into the sectional wellness? Or let me go back. What is sectional wellness for anybody that don't necessarily know?
I mean, when we're saying sexual wellness, we're saying, okay, do you have a healthy libido? And then with that, so that's one tier, one column we could say of it is your libido healthy? But even within that, it's like, well, what does that mean? And that is a little bit of a difficult thing to define because medically we really don't. Like medically, when we say, okay, somebody gets diagnosed with a low libido, which is technically called hypoactive sexual desire disorder, that silly mouthful. When somebody gets that silly mouthful of a diagnosis, say, okay, your libido's low. Well, we get that when they tell their doctor for 6 months that there's libido, that their libido is low. So if you tell your doctor for 6 months you have a low sex drive, then they will stamp your paperwork and say, okay, you have a low sex drive. It doesn't really tell us what's normal. It's a very dysfunctional way of looking at it. So when we look at surveys of couples that report they are the happiest in their relationships, the average that they are having sex and being intimate is once a week. So, in my world, my definition of this, because I'm oriented to helping couples thrive and helping couples be happy together. And so, what I tell people is if you are not having sex in your relationship at least once a week, and it's because there's that lack of drive or desire, then that libido is low. But in sexual wellness, we're also looking beyond even desire. We're looking at, okay, well, what other things make the body function well and have this? Like, is your circulation good? Do you have good pelvic floor function? right? We also look at things like, do you have any genital shame? Do you have any body shame? Do you have any shame around having sex? Do you have any shame in any way that's preventing you from exploring this with your partner? What are your levels of communication like? Are you able to talk to your partner about this? Are you able to ask for your needs and ask for your sexual wants and desires? And all of those things, from like the personal, the physical, the interpersonal way we relate to our partner, all of that is really what makes up sexual wellness.
Awesome. Yeah, this is something that don't really get talked about because it's not, like a fancy topic. But so I'm glad you joined the podcast today because I think a lot of people can learn a little bit more about it. And it's a weird conversation to have, especially with your spouse. You don't really know how to bring it up, how to talk about it. So I've been married 3 years now, so I'll still say we're
Right.
pretty newly married. So it's things like that is not always very comfortable. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point you're bringing up because we need to normalize how not normal this is in many ways, because I think so many times people feel like they're alone. Like, one survey showed that 70% of people want to talk to their doctor about sex and don't. So when I read surveys like that, what I'm hearing, what like how I interpret that is like, we're in a society of people that actually have a lot of questions here, that are curious, that are interested in learning how to please their partner more, how to provide more love. They're just like curious about things. We're in the society of curiosity, and yet we don't have right now a platform where we're like really normalizing this conversation and really teaching people how to have this conversation lovingly and effectively and that sort of thing. So to kind of piggyback off of what you said, I really do encourage people, if they're like, "Oh, this feels like a little bit like taboo or a little uncomfortable," it's just like, that's totally normal to feel that way. Like, even when I first started talking about this, it's like, am I going to really do this? Am I going to really just go on podcasts around the world and just talk about sex? But I wake up every day and I do it because of the need, and because I just see what can happen when couples are deciding that, okay, they are going to start prioritizing this and putting effort in, what it can do to a marriage, what it can do to a long-term relationship to keep it strong. So it's normal if this is new to feel uncomfortable, but I assure you that if you're like, okay, this is uncomfortable, but I'm kind of interested, you're in the majority, not the minority of people that feel that way.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a little bit about, okay, this is what I'm going to do now. So how did you get into this? Like, what inspired you to kind of focus on this, area of wellness, especially for long-term couples?
Yeah, two different. I mean, there was an original story that got me interested in my very early 20s in sex and in learning more about sex and relationship, and I can tell that story. But the story that is really related to couples and long-term couples, and why I decided to actually speak out about this and more turn this into a career, was after I decided in my 30s. I was married, and we had decided in our marriage to turn our marriage into an open marriage. And I learned we're no longer married for many reasons. One of them being that he innately decided that that relationship was 100% for him, and I innately decided that it was 100% not the relationship style for me. And what I really got interested in, though, post that, was the science of passion and what is like happening to our brain in those exciting new relationship moments, and why that excitement, that passion tends to diminish, right? And it's chemical related, it's chemistry, it's chemicals in our brain. So seeing that, I felt very, very clear at that moment, many moments still to this day, that I am wired for monogamy. My curiosity then, and still is, how can we take some of that interesting part around the science and the chemistry of like that newness and that passion, and recreate that within the context of monogamy, to get kind of that those good vibes going, so that we can actually feel that passion again, based upon altering our brain chemistry.
And just to be clear, monogamy is one partner, right?
Monogamy is one partner,
Okay.
correct.
I just
Yeah.
want to make sure I had that
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the interest, is how can we have one partner and be with this partner, many times for decades. and and hopefully for decades, if that's our goal, right? And then how can we keep that relationship full of passion, full of desire, full of those intense intimate moments? And because if we look at this, right, and I was listening to a talk by Richard Bandler, who, anybody who knows him, he's a co-founder of a brain retraining program called neurolinguistic programming. I was listening to a talk with from him many years ago, and it was like so. It was the way he said it was so perfect, because he was talking about when he first got married to his wife, and he was saying that, oh, when he first got married, people were coming up to him all the time and saying like, "Huh, well, to now that you're married, sex is going to go down. The sex is going to go down. The passion's going to go down. So you better get it in now while it's still hot." And his answer to them was something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing, not quoting here, but it was something along the lines of not making sense, because how could you do something over and over and over and over again? And when else in life would you do something over and over and over and over again and get worse at it? So it's another example of, right, like we practice with one person, we do this act many, many, many times throughout our life. So if we do this act with this same person, just like anything else, if we cook the same dish every single day, every single week, whatever it is, we would think we would like really get better at making that dish. So same sort of thing. If we're doing this with the same person, shouldn't we get better at it instead of shouldn't it dwindle? So what is, so again, it's like that's like the work is like, what is the science behind why this happens? And how do we make it take a different path?
Yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought of it that way. That makes a lot of sense though. Like
Yeah.
you would think you would get better and better at it, but it's kind of like you said, you get worse and worse at it, or it's not as
Right.
good. That's
Exactly.
interesting. I never thought of it that way before.
Yeah. And one of the reasons do you want me to continue, or were you
Oh
gonna?
no, you're good. Good. You're good. Go
Okay,
ahead.
okay. One of the reasons for that is we get into like these, what we call in the sex therapy and the sex coaching and the sex world, sexual scripts. And sexual scripts are basically like, okay, well, you kiss me this way, I kiss you back this way, we go this position, we do that act, we do this act, and then voila is the big grand finale. And most couples left to their own devices, because we are creatures of habit, right? That's, it's like most of us drive the same way to work every day, the same way to pick up our kids, even though if there's multiple routes, we like get this one way and we can just lock in and do that one way without even thinking about it. So our sex lives become similar, right? Where it's just this habit and we lock into that script, A plus B equals C. And unless left to our devices, we break out of that habit. And so it's like, it's one of these things, right, where it's like the analogy I give sometime is like learning guitar, right? So if somebody learns to play guitar and you get taught like the C chord, and you start learning this chord and you're like, okay, I'm getting really good at this chord, and now you play the G chord and it's getting really exciting, because now you can go to C to G and G to C and you can strum in different ways, and it's like, wow, there's a lot I can do here. It feels so exciting. Very cool. C and G feel very exciting in the beginning. You can play songs with C and G. You can do all these things. Well, if 5, 10, 15, 20, and on years go by and all you were playing was the C and G chord, you're probably going to get a little bored, truthfully. It's probably going to be like, this is like not very exciting. Like, and that's what happens with long-term relationships, right? It's like left to our own devices without learning information, without having some way of educating on new things around the sex world, then we wind up just playing the C and G our whole lives. And it's just going to get boring to anybody. It doesn't mean anybody's doing anything wrong. It just means like, well, all we've had is carrots and potatoes our whole lives, and we would like to have a steak.
So, so what are some of your tips or advice that you have for couples that do get stuck in that C and G on that chord? What do you kind of tell them? How do you get them out of that rut? Where do they go from there?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And there's many different things, but one of the foundational things is starting to talk about sex. And I say this because 92% of people that report having that really satisfying sex lives, 92% of them talk about it. So that's large majority, right? We got to talk about it. And most of us are not taught how, because if we're going to break out of C and G and we're like going to try a new position, or we're going to try something else new of anything, we usually want to have a conversation around like, I want to try this, maybe we're going to try a different lube, maybe we're going to try a different location, right? There's a lot of ways of bringing in newness, but in order to do that, we have to talk about it, because the other thing that really comes down to breaking out of the C and G chord is making sure that we are communicating with our partner around like, actually, that thing, that G chord is like, maybe it used to feel good, but it's not doing it anymore. Can we switch? Like, we need to be able to say that. So it is an area where we have to practice extreme caution is talking about sex, because the ego gets involved here, and the ego can so easily get hurt here. And so, and I think there's an element, at least I theorize there's an element of like evolutionary, like reasons for that, because I do think as humans, with procreation for survival of the species, right? I do think there's this almost a subconscious conscious evolutionary driver that's like, well, I need to be able to do this well, because that's how I like help with survival of the species. So there is an element where anytime we are talking about sex and our intimate lives, there is a tendency for everybody to become more self-protective and to worry, at least subconsciously, about their own safety. Am I a good lover, right? Am I good at this? Am I able to provide pleasure for my partner, right? These are common things that come up. So, with that, we need to take a step back and say, okay, well, how do we first start communicating about something when we're not practiced at it and there is a high propensity for the ego to get hurt? And one of the first things we do is we lay a foundation. And we see in like non-sex conversation relationships, such as the research that's come out of the Gottman Institute, which they do a lot of research on couples, and what they have found in their study and research is that when couples are thriving, one commonality they have is that for every 5 positive things they say no more than 1 negative thing. So for everything that you're gonna say, "Hey, I wish this was different. I wish you would do that differently," they say 5 things they love about that person, right? So what we're doing is we're filling that emotional bucket up. So, one of the first foundational skills to start working on in the sex world is making it safe to talk about sex, because that's where we build. And so, when we do that, similar to other styles of relationships, we start by building up our sex conversation love bucket. And so, the foundational skill is just to start talking to your partner and say things like, specifically what you love about them as far as anything physical, sexual, right? What you love about them or what they do, and be specific about it. The way you kiss me in this way at this moment makes me feel XYZ. So it feels very personal to them. It's very different than being like, I love the way you kiss me. I love the way you make love to me. That doesn't have that same sort of thing around like feeling like this person like is deeply touched. The more we build that relationship bucket up to say, wow, my lover, my partner, my husband, my wife, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, they are saying so many good things. Like, I feel like I'm an amazing lover. I feel like I'm really providing this for them. Like, the more we feel confident because our partner has helped build us up so much there, the more that then when we do need to say things that later on around, like, oh, well, I'd like to try this, or can we change this around? It's not going to have that same level of threat to the safety, because our love bucket is now so high. So that's usually the foundational step of where we want to start.
Yeah, so the main thing I hear you say is communication. Like, communication is key, and that's just in my short little 3 years of marriage. That's I've definitely learned that. I've had to learn that myself. That was one of the main things I've learned so far. That's helped our relationship tremendously. And to me, it's not just in sex life. It's for everything in your marriage. Communication is for us is like number one, and that's something that I was not good at. Like, I admit, me and my wife are totally opposite. Like, she's an open book. She tells me everything, and I'm the opposite. So I've had to work on that a lot. It's been a struggle for me, and I feel like men probably struggle with that more. So that's something I've had to work on, and it's definitely helped. Like, I've already seen improvement, just trying to be more open and talk to her about more things, and she likes it too. So it's going a long ways for us. So it, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think there's an element where like with that, we've as humans, I think there's an element where we're not taught maybe as much as we were historically about like the power of curiosity, right? And with the power of curiosity comes the power of questions. And and there is a way to answer questions too. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever been out on a date. Actually, I was talking to my partner about this, and he was talking about a date he had gone on many years ago, and this woman he was on a date with said something. He's like, asked her a question around like, oh, what do you like to do for fun? And it was something like lots of things. Where do you like to travel? All over, right? So like we can like in like those types of answers, like you can't grasp onto that, and there's not like a hook with that to lead deeper. So with I do think innately some people process things more externally, other people process things more internally. So there can be a difference too. It's like, yes, open, closed book, sure. But there is an element too where I think some people are internal processors and other people are external processors. External processors tend to like just like share more easily because that's how they actually process things and make decisions, and it helps them with their process, versus internal processors don't do that because as much because they don't need that help oftentimes in the same sort of way as like their decision making process. So with the questions and with the curiosity, I think it's like asking anytime we're saying, okay, well, communication, yes, but how do we communicate? Like, and there is an element where we can help each other around like, okay, we can start by asking more questions. And this applies sexually or non-sexually. Like sexually, it's like, what do you love about our sex life? What do you love about XYZ? What do you love about where we're having sex? What do you love about how often we're having sex? Like anything in like that curiosity standpoint. But then it also depends upon like we do want to commit as far as having good conversations and good communications to quality of answers, because we can ask questions all day long which can lead to potential getting conversations going. But in the example like where I was just sharing, where my partner was on this date long before he and I got together, where he was asking questions and the woman was giving these answers that were so like you couldn't grow the conversation. It wasn't like my favorite place to go on vacation around the world was Africa, and it was South Africa, and like here's why. And you could there was like nothing to like grab on to ask follow-up questions. So I think when like anytime we're creating communication and curiosity, sex and otherwise, we want to consider questions we're asking, and we also want to consider giving our partner, if they're asking us questions, enough context and enough information where it's like we can get the conversation going from there.
Yeah. So the audience here is fitness minded. So I wanted to ask you more fitness related questions. So how does starting or restarting a fitness journey, how does that open the door for better intimacy or sexual wellness within your relationship?
Well, there are surveys that show that body image dramatically makes a difference with sex drive. So, a couple different things. I mean, for sure, most people tend to feel more like getting naked and being sexy with their partner when they're feeling better about their body. And even if somebody is like just starting their fitness goals, like, I've talked to people that like, hey, and then I'm sure many listeners know this, right? Like you're having a bad day, maybe you're not feeling as good as your body, you go work out. And even though like nothing's really changed that much from that one workout, right? It accumulates over time. Um, People can have like a dramatic shift in how they're feeling, right? So when we feel better in our body, we do tend to have more of a propensity to say, hey, I'm more interested in this. There's the obvious thing that you need to have energy and stamina in order to have a drive. So certainly that is absolutely part of it. We do also see that exercise can raise our hormones, like heavy weightlifting, can improve testosterone levels. So we can also consider that from like the hormonal perspective. And as testosterone levels improve, that is one thing that can play into a healthier sex drive.
Now I know the testosterone is affects men a lot, but how do you see that affecting women? Does it affect their hormones the same, or is it
Oh,
different?
100%. It's an important thing that you brought up, and there's a lot of just a lot of like education that needs to happen around this. Is that testosterone is actually of any hormone that's in the female body from a sex hormone perspective. We actually have more testosterone than estrogen and progesterone. Testosterone is actually a dominant hormone for women. It is just not dominant at the level that it is for men. So we obviously have way higher estrogen levels than men, way higher progesterone levels than men. So there is that difference. But testosterone is an incredibly important hormone for women, not only for things like muscle mass and sex drive, but even for things like building bone.
So working out increases, the testosterone in women as well, just like it
It,
would in men.
it does. It
Okay,
does. Yep. Absolutely.
that's interesting. I didn't.
Yeah.
I've heard of working out increasing your testosterone, but I didn't know it had like that much of effect on you. So,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's one of many components, right? It's like we wanna consider that with, like, other things, like blood sugar imbalances and insulin problems can lower testosterone, so if you work out, but you have blood sugar imbalance, like, you might not notice the difference, so, there's many factors that go involved here, so I don't wanna reduce this down to say, "Hey, this is, like, your sure ticket way," but it is one of many factors that can play a role.
so in your practice, what are some of the most like common changes you see in couples, like when they do start, their physical fitness journey? Is there any like anything you see? Is there Do you see improvements like right away, or is there any other benefits that you see out of it? Is there kind of a correlation in that?
When it comes to sexual health
Hmm.
or just in general?
Just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime people start a fitness program, I mean, from a standpoint of mental, emotional standpoint, there can be a lot of things like certainly stamina can go up. I do see that when people are incredibly chronically ill, like I do work with sometimes really, really, really sick people. And I do see sometimes when people start their workout journey too far or too soon, too fast, it can backfire on them a little bit. So I do want to like raise that caution that if people are like, wow, they feel really, really, really poorly due to variety of health conditions, sometimes we do have to like consider the pace that we're going. But certainly, I mean, how people feel, pain in their body, cognitively, how they think, their mood, anxiety, depression, sleep. There's definitely a lot of things that the fitness program can help with.
So you mentioned when you start a fitness journey, typically your testosterone will raise. So what is happening to somebody's body, for example, a bodybuilder, when they get to extreme levels of fitness, and it does the opposite. It lowers their libido. Because I did a bodybuilding show last year, and I experienced this firsthand, and it's definitely a thing. So I'm just curious, what's happening there? Like, why are you getting the opposite effect there?
Well, I want to clarify one thing is that like what tends to happen with testosterone in fitness is related to things that are like purely weightlifting, right?
Hmm.
So there is an element where weightlifting, that more high intensity, will improve testosterone and libido. But then we also need to name that if cortisol goes up too high, and cortisol tends to go up higher in sustained cardio, and that if cortisol tends to go high, like we do in sustained cardio, that can actually turn back and not only lower testosterone, but lower sex drive. Some people, and this is where, like with the bodybuilding thing, to me, that sounds like an element of what, like, even like long distance runners and athletes will refer to as being overtrained. So
Hmm.
overtrain oftentimes is when we have maxed out. We've pushed our bodies so much and those cortisol levels so much that people go from having a higher cortisol to actually having too low of a cortisol. And oftentimes we don't talk about too low of a cortisol, but cortisol is very important. Like it gets a bad reputation because it's too high oftentimes. But if we don't have enough cortisol, we go to the hospital. Like we cannot function. So if our cortisol drops low enough. So one of the things that can happen for people when they're overtrained is that the cortisol, because it's been pushed out so much for that overtraining, actually falls. And when that cortisol is very low, people like their fatigue is like real. The exhaustion is real. Walking up a flight of stairs gets really hard. And so when our cortisol is that low, we have almost like the opposite problem where we just don't have we literally don't have any energy. We're trying to get through the day and survive it. So I don't know. I've never looked up from that, the bodybuilding perspective what's happening. So I don't know specifically the answer to that, but I have researched the overtraining thing like I'm talking about, and my suspicion, at least my theory, with not having researched bodybuilding itself, my suspicion is it probably is related to that overtraining situation.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with you. And just getting to extreme low levels of body fat, it's not very healthy for you.
Right.
Yeah, I felt that you said you wouldn't have any energy. That's exactly true. Like I had no energy to do anything outside of my training, and I couldn't even really do my training.
Yeah.
It was a very unique experience. I don't think it's something that I would do long term. So I have a lot of
Right.
respect. I have a lot of respect for bodybuilders because I did it once and it was very hard. And it was cool. Like I'm glad I did it, but I definitely not for me. That was definitely tough.
Yeah.
I just sat on the couch all day and thought about food. It was not a fun experience.
Yeah, I had a female trainer at one point, and she was a bodybuilder, and she was telling me, it was like the closest I've ever like learned about like beyond even like the weightlifting, like everything that goes in to that particular, sport or activity, if you however you want to call it. And she used to always say the way she would describe it, she would be like, bodybuilding is the most selfish activity, is how she would tell me. And she said it that way because I think she said it that way because of the impact she would share with me, like on her relationships, because every decision she made on, health, wellness, where she ate, how she's like, everything was related to this without any ability to, like alter the plan. It was just so all consuming. So it was definitely a big, aha moment for me too, around like there's way more to it than just like what you see of like the weightlifting and the physique.
Oh, absolutely. Your life revolves around bodybuilding. Like
Right.
everything you do is bodybuilding first. There is no altering. There's no altering off of your plan. You have to hit your
Right.
plan exactly. Like
Right.
I carried meal prep containers with me everywhere I went. I ate 6 times a day, like
Yeah.
on the clock. Like there was no missing cardio, everything. Like it was very hard. You got to have a supportive partner for sure. Another
Yes.
that's a test for your relationship right there.
Right?
'Cause,
For sure.
it was a tough experience, but
Yeah.
we got through it. It was fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's good, good to challenge the human body and spirit sometimes.
Oh yeah. So you've trained thousands of professionals worldwide. What are some evidence based advice that you think everyone should know about, maintaining a healthy sex life long term in their relationship?
Make sure that you are running lab tests and not the lab tests that just your doctors run. So, oftentimes when it comes to like symptoms, when it comes to like sexual health, for example, like ED, and I don't mean just erectile dysfunction, like where somebody's like, "Well, I can't get a hard on." I mean like, wow, it's just like maybe not quite as like strong as it used to be, right? That is oftentimes the first early warning sign of a cardiovascular problem because blood doesn't just flow to the penis, it flows through the entire body. So, and same thing for women, like vaginal dryness, pelvic pain, sometimes that's a circulation issue. So, oftentimes, if there's something happening in an imbalance in the physical body leading to low desire, the thing to always remember is whatever's happening with that imbalance, yes, it's like it could be affecting desire, but it's probably not only affecting desire because the body is all connected. So if that's where it's like some people are like, well, this is not just a priority to me right now. And, that's anybody's, of course, own choice. But what I think is important to be educated on is if your health is a priority, then like all we're saying with low libido in many ways is there's something off with your health. And don't you want, if like you're interested in your fitness, I know anybody listening to this is health oriented because they're listening to your show. And so that's how I think an important like frame and lens around like even if you decide for whatever reason your sex life's not your priority, if it is low, there's an imbalance. And it's important to understand what that imbalance is. So I have a free resource too for your listeners that if people go to libidoquiz.com, so it's super easy. It's just libidoquiz.com. You can find an online test and it will, once you take the test, it will spit out the top reason for low libido. And then you'll get a follow up email from me where I will give you the top tests to ask your doctor about. Because one of the things that we commonly see, whether it's thyroid or testosterone or whatever, is that the tests that unfortunately we're doing in conventional medicine are very rudimentary. They're very basic, and they don't tell us oftentimes some of those earlier imbalances. And if you are like maximizing your fitness, you want to know if there's something in your body that is not working, as well as it should be. That's part of health. And so the idea with this is when you take the quiz at libidoquiz.com, you will then be able to get this email that says, hey, here's 10 tests that are really important to evaluate this situation. And then you can take those tests to your doctor, and now you know how to advocate for yourself more based upon that.
Yeah, I think it's you mentioned a good point that if you're like if you're experiencing ED, that's not just a sign that you're not in the mood. That's a sign like something else is wrong. Like you need to
Yeah,
go get yourself checked out because something else is your body's not functioning the way it's supposed to. So that's
bingo.
very important. I just wanted to reiterate that. That's a great thing to mention there. I like that. And then so speaking of the tests you run, I know you mentioned a lot about cortisol. Is there any like big time players that you really look into when it comes to your libido or things like that?
Well, certainly, right? So we do want to look at all our sex hormones. So we have estrogen, we have progesterone, we have testosterone. But even with those, you want to make sure that you're doing good tests. So, for example, we can create a fine amount of testosterone, but some of it cannot be available to our cells. And if we make it, but our cells can't use it, it's basically almost like we didn't make it, because it's all about the utility. Can we use what the body makes? So that's where we want to test the total testosterone, which is the amount our body makes, plus the free testosterone, which is the amount our body can use. So we want to make sure we're doing that. Another example of that is with estrogen. Oftentimes, women are only testing for total estrogen. That tells us a total amount that we make, but we make these different types of estrogen, and some of them are weaker and some of them are stronger. So if we're making more of the weaker kind and not enough of the stronger kind, our total might look fine, but it might not be having the same impact on our cells because the majority of it is a weaker form. That also being said, it's super interesting. There's studies on men with low sex drive or a level of ED, erectile dysfunction. And some of these studies, what they do, this is going to shock the men listening, is they don't give the men testosterone, they give them estrogen. And what they
Mhm.
find is when they give the men estrogen, their erectile function improves. And so some of what research have theorized from this is that testosterone is obviously the predominant hormone for men, but what we see is that estrogen helps testosterone work stronger in the body. So you also need to make sure you have a proper level of estrogen as a man, not too much, but just enough to make sure that it's doing its job of helping the testosterone work in a stronger way. So we want to make sure like we're considering, some of those nuances. Like, we can consider proper thyroid health, insulin levels, but I could go on and on all day, honestly, on this topic, because like thyroid is another example. Like most commonly, people when they're testing their thyroid, they're getting tests called TSH, and maybe they're getting something called T4. Well, TSH, what is the most common thyroid test, is not even thyroid hormone. It's a brain hormone. So we make TSH in our brain, and then TSH tells our thyroid to make thyroid hormone. Well, what can happen is our brain can make all the TSHs wanting to and be very good, and the levels look good, but the thyroid could just not be listening and responding to the brain. And so when we're not actually testing the thyroid and we're just testing the brain, we don't know for sure if the thyroid is responding. We're just assuming that it's responding. So we really want to make sure we're testing more thoroughly, those kind of things. And that's true for anything, whether we're talking about these, whether we're talking about neurological health, our circulation, anything. It's like the quality of the answers is really related to the quality of the test, but also to how the test is interpreted. Because another important point for people to understand is we have lowered the testosterone range of what's normal, like that. When you look at the reference range, the high and low around, like, oh, this is my number where it's normal. We've lowered for testosterone that reference range about 40% in the past 45 years. So as we become sicker and sicker, and a population with worse and worse testosterone levels, we just keep moving the level, so we have more people that fall in normal. So the other thing is that if you get your T tested and you're in range, but you're on that lower, half of that range, you're probably actually low testosterone. It's just that we've changed those numbers to allow people to fit into normal for whatever reason we see that is important in medicine. So you really, it's like, it really isn't just about the test and making sure you have a thorough test. It's also about making sure you have somebody that's interpreting these tests well to know if you're truly at an optimal level, because you can have a lot of symptoms and quote unquote be normal, but still have a problem in that area.
So, what are some ways that you can naturally increase these numbers, like your testosterone, estrogen, outside of your normal things like sleep, eating better? We all know that. Is there any of them that I may not be thinking of that could help increase these numbers?
Well, exercise, I mean, certainly, like we've talked a little bit about, so that's definitely a huge one. Definitely, I think there can be benefits from cardio, but, I certainly think, like, our HIIT training, our weightlifting are just some of the most profound from a hormone balancing perspective. So making sure you're getting, like, those types of exercise in, walking, walk as much as possible is always a good plan as well. But certainly also besides that, we want to consider that cholesterol is the building block of these hormones. So this is an area where we got to get away from this thinking that cholesterol is like the big bad enemy. Obviously, cholesterol can cause problems, right? But what a lot of people don't realize is we don't consume the majority of our cholesterol. We make the majority of our cholesterol. About 80% of the cholesterol in our body we make from our liver. Well, why are we making all this cholesterol? Well, we're making the cholesterol because we need it to make things like estrogen, things like testosterone, right? So cholesterol is kind of like that grandparent of things like testosterone and estrogen. We make it out of it. So from a standpoint of like statins and these cholesterol lowering medications, like this is a not saying there's not reason for some people to be on those. Sometimes there are, but the way that we're oftentimes being overprescribed without looking to say, well, why is my cholesterol high? What do I need to change in diet, lifestyle, getting to the root versus just, going on these cholesterol medications is very, very important because that is that building block for those things. So we really do not want to shut down our cholesterol production. Healthy fats make a difference. So definitely staying away from the industrial seed oils, our canola, sunflower, safflower. Those are getting a lot more press recently. So people might know about those, and then making sure we're eating, our good healthy fish oils or omega-3s, those types of fats. And then there's herbs. So herbal therapy, I have not seen. You can read like online about certain herbs, like black cohosh comes up a lot. For example, Dong Quai is another one that comes up a lot for raising estrogen. In my practice, I've honestly been very unimpressed with herbs being able to change estrogen levels. There are some good things that will lower estrogen, like DIM, if somebody has a high estrogen level. But for raising estrogen from a standpoint of a woman being perimenopausal or a man being like, hey, I had low on my labs and I just want to like raise my estrogen to help my testosterone, I really haven't seen the herbs work very well. But that being said, I have seen herbs work decently for testosterone. So Tongkat Ali is a really good one. Shilajit is a really good one. Nettles is a really good one. And Tribulus is a really good one. Tribulus probably of all of them I've seen the best results with, but I do also like the other ones that I have mentioned. Once people reach like a menopause, andropause stage of life, and for those that haven't heard of andropause, that's like similar to menopause. It's like that phase in midlife where men's hormones start to decline. It's not talked about as much in many ways because with women, it's like a little more clearly defined around like, okay, the menses changed was a little more obvious. Men, it's like gradual and there's not that like, moment of something external happening. So men don't have that, it's not given that same amount of publicity and press, but there is that level where those hormones do fall in midlife. And I haven't seen from that standpoint, well, I have seen in younger generations, I have seen the herbs work very well for testosterone. Once people reach that midlife, I find that most people to keep their testosterone high, most people really do well in most cases on being on testosterone replacement therapy. And that's for women and men.
Hmm. So, who you mentioned like the tongue cat Ali and the herbs and stuff? Who would you recommend to use those? Like, at what point do you get to where you would recommend that to somebody?
Well, testing your hormones and seeing they're low, so it's
Mhm.
like it's a good idea to test your hormones, especially if you're having, low sex drive. But really it's just a good thing on like a yearly basis to check in on some of the basics, like your hormone levels, because you want to catch things when they're a little out of balance more than when they're a lot of out of balance. Ideally, it's easier to fix. And so testing your hormones and determining that they're low compared to where they should be would be, a great time. Now, if you're more in the middle age stage of life and you're like, you want to try the herbs, I have seen herbs be helpful in combination with some of the pharmaceuticals, with some of the, the replacement therapy. So it's still from a standpoint, okay, time to try them, but it really would be, the time is really based upon, hey, you tested, which I recommend on a yearly basis, and your levels are low.
Yeah, I'm still, I don't have kids yet, so like I want to stay away from the TRT and stuff, just for fertility reasons. But so the herbs are. I was just asking. I was curious about that. Like
Yeah.
if there was a certain age or something, you would recommend that. Because I have experienced, kind of lower testosterone. I've had it. I try to get it tested at least once a year. And
Good.
the whole bodybuilding show kind of destroyed my hormones. So I'm trying to get them back right now. I'm trying to work on it. So
Yeah, I would
I was
definitely
just
check those
curious.
out.
Yeah, I need to. It's actually probably time for me to get them tested again. So I need to do that. So I'm glad we had the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and if anybody's listening to, in my book that's just, released, called Want to Want It, I actually go through research on dosing too. So if you're like, "What dose do you start," you start with on these things, I go through all of these kinda herbs and like, "Oh, for this one, this dose, and that one, and that dose," and go through this. You can find the studies in there as well. So that's in my Want to Want It book.
Absolutely. So we'll take it back to like kind of newer couples. What would you recommend to newer couples so that they don't get in this kind of slump in their sex life or just in their marriages at all? What do you recommend that they do to kind of get ahead of the game?
I mean, definitely talk about it right away, so you build that. But another thing that I say that I get, probably anything I say, I get the most resistance to this, which is to schedule sex and intimacy. And I get a lot of resistance because people are like, well, but I want it to be spontaneous. But I have a lot of points on that. One is, in the beginning, you always scheduled it, you just didn't call it that. So here's what I mean. So when we are dating, we are always basically scheduling our time. Like, we don't live together at that point, most likely. So it's, do I get to see you on Friday? Am I going to see you again on Wednesday? And as the relationship progresses, and once we reach that whatever point in that we decide to be sexually intimate, we usually go into those days like knowing that there's a pretty good possibility that we are going to end in some sort of intimate way. And unless it's like a quick coffee before work, and then we don't. Point being, we schedule it. We just aren't calling it that. And so then when we combine our lives, when we move in together, when we share, keys to each other's places, when we buy homes together, when we get married, whatever we're doing where we're combining and we're overlapping our lives, that's usually when we stop scheduling it. And the thing that tends to happen for people is like, just like going to the gym, like as soon as we finish this podcast, so like I have a 30-minute window to get ready and get to the gym because I'm meeting with my trainer. It is scheduled, right? That is when I'm working
Mhm.
out today. It is always scheduled. I know when I'm going to get my exercise every single day. And that's how it gets done. So anything that is like important in our lives, we tend to put it on the calendar. We know when we're going to pick our kids up from school. We know when their recitals and their games are because we want to show up. So all of the things that are important to us might make their way on the calendar. The number one thing that is important to us as humans that tends to not make its way on the calendar as often is time with our intimate partner. And, when we're still in the new side of things, this can be okay. But what tends to happen with, unless if we're left to our own devices without changing something, what tends to happen is we wind up basically not scheduling, so there's no place for it, and we're waiting until we get to bed oftentimes, and it's like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and you're tired, and you've been doing all the things today, for the day, and you might be stressed and thinking about the next day, and all of a sudden, we're supposed to, like, flip a switch and get into sexy time. It doesn't make logical sense. So the point of scheduling it is just like it's kind of like scheduling, going to the gym. If get your gym workout in, and then you happen to be able to take an extra walk later in the day or do something extra, take a yoga class, whatever it is, then that's a bonus and you don't have to schedule that one. But at least scheduling once a week where it's like we are putting this intimate time on our calendar so that we are prioritizing this in our lives, and then have all the spontaneity you want around that. But that way you are saying, hey, this is so important to me that it actually is getting a place on the calendar. That's what you're doing when you're scheduling it. You're saying, this is so important. And while it does not sound as sexy sometimes because it's not spontaneous, one of the things that I find is that when we schedule it, there's a few different things that happen. If somebody has less of a desire than the other person, it gives them time to be like, okay, I can get in the mood. I can go take a bath. I can do whatever I need to put myself in the mood. And it also can take some pressure off. Like, because I know sometimes couples will tell me, and I've gone through this myself too, where it's like, oh, you want to, and it's like Wednesday night and you're so tired and you know you should, and then you don't because you're exhausted and you feel kind of guilty because you're letting your partner down. So it can also help settle that, because then it's like, okay, well, spontaneity is great and you can still build that in. But if you know that for sure you are committed to this time, if the other times you're like, I actually really do need to go and take care of myself tonight, there it kind of I have found it can help to release that feeling of guilt, because you still know that you have a place for your partner and you're prioritizing them. So we just if we are left to our own devices, majority of people, not everybody, but the majority of people, it just starts fading into a it'll happen when it'll happen, which is usually not crazy frequently.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice. We've actually done that ourselves, and it works for us
Yay.
because we'll it's like you said, you get at 10 o'clock at night and you're tired and you're like, screw that, we're going to bed.
Right.
So that
Exactly.
that actually is it's worked for us. So yeah, I definitely I relate to that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have a podcast of your own. So what are some things that people can expect to hear over on your podcast?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Libido Lounge. It's found at every major podcast platform. So I'm everywhere. You can find me. And you can find, I interview a ton of different people. It's interview anything from doctors to sex coaches, sex therapists, relationship coaches, intimacy and marriage counselors, creators of vibrators and all sorts of things. So it's really anything around love, passion, communication, how you can have a more fulfilling and passionate sex life, how you can have a more fulfilling and passionate marriage and relationship. Anything in that realm, you'll find on my channel.
Awesome. So why do you think people are kind of craving this kind of education and this kind of support right now?
I think in some way we probably always have. I think now that we have social media, we have ways of communicating where we're realizing we're not alone. But it's interesting, right? So if you look back to, I believe this was like in the 1960s, I think maybe even into the 70s. So don't quote me on the timing perfectly here, but there's this time period where doctors were actually curing. I'm saying this in air quotes for anybody that's listening, because what I'm about to say is very ludicrous. But when women were coming into the doctor's office and they had a lot of anxiety and they were having emotional outbursts at home and all these things, and their husbands would send them to the doctor was actually quote unquote curing them by basically fingering them to orgasm. Literally, they were getting fingered to orgasm by their doctor. And they called this, quote unquote, again, air quotes, they call this disease hysteria. And this actually motivated the creation of the first vibrator, because doctors were finding that they were getting sore from doing all these hysteria treatments. And so they needed a device where that could help them so they wouldn't have to use their fingers. But point being, like this feeling of like something being off in sex life it's not new by any means. It's just that we are now at a point where it is, well, it's still taboo. It's like enough not taboo where I think we're able to talk about this, and through channels like yours that are willing to, talk about this live and get guests like me on, I think people are starting to feel like less alone and less scared to bring it up, because there's just more resources available.
All right, I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll let you go. So, if there's a couple listening now, and they're kind of feeling stuck, whether that's in their fitness or their intimacy or both, What's the first step you'd recommend them to take today to move forward?
Besides beginning to talk about it, so that's like the first like at home action step is like start that foundational stuff like I already talked about, talk about it, right? Besides that, I really do recommend that you get my book, Want to Want It. So on Want to Want It, in this book, the subtitle is How to Want Sex, Have More of It, and Get Better at It. So I go through lab tests. I go through everything from that physical side. I talk about communication. I talk about how to bring more passion back in. I talk about why this might have fallen and how to get back on track. So that's a really easy way to get started. And then I also have a ton of free content. I have so much free content for people. So other ways you can learn about this and just take a first initial baby step for free is go to my website at mylibidodoc.com, and you'll see a button there that says freebies on it. So just go to the freebies tab at mylibidodoc.com, and you'll see a ton of free ways of getting started to get support as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all I have for you today. I appreciate you joining the podcast. I learned a lot, and I think everybody else will get something from it as well. So yeah, just thank you for joining the podcast again. I enjoyed your time. If there's anywhere else you would like people to find you, you can let them know as well on your social media or wherever.
I think that'll do it. I mean, you'll find me on YouTube at My Libido Doc is the handle there. You'll find me on Instagram at My Romance Doc. But to not give people like too many places, I say, go to wantit.com, mylibidodoc.com, and you'll find all those great freebies. So thank you for having
Absolutely.
me, Murphy. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you for joining.